our first speaker, Karl Seeley.
Thank you. I get it. I get why people love fossil fuels. They're these incredibly concentrated, powerful, versatile fuel sources just sitting there under our feet, and they have enabled us to accomplish things that our ancestors could not have imagined in their wildest dreams. They're great. They are fantastic. They're like a surprise inheritance from an eccentric, distant relative you didn't know you had. The executor reads out the will and says, there's all this stuff in the ground and it's yours to use. Like, sure, you have to dig it up and you have to figure out what to actually do with it, how to use it. But as you figure that out, you realize, this stuff is gold. No, this stuff is better than gold. This stuff makes gold look silly, useless. What can you actually do with gold? This stuff. You can do anything. This is worth quadrillions of dollars. That's 1,000 trillions, which is 1,000 billions, which is 1,000 millions. It's a lot. This stuff is worth quadrillions of dollars. And so you start spending it. And about 100 years after you've really started spending it, the executor pulls out this kind of fuzzy note that says, oh, spending this might have consequences. But you're busy. You're fighting a world war. You're dealing with a Great Depression. You're fighting another world war. You're engaged in an existential struggle against communism. From another perspective, engaged in existential struggle against capitalism. It's all the same, really, from the larger perspective. You start getting more of these notes, and they say things like, if you spend too much of this inheritance, at some point in the future, things might get a little warmer. But that's kind of vague. And you're like, well, how much is too much? And when is some point in the future? And I'm not sure why warmer is bad. And then the existential struggle against communism is over, and congratulations, you won. But then you get into this global struggle with terrorism from the other side of the fence. Existential struggle against capitalism is over. Congratulations, you lost. You are now capitalists, sort of. So you're done with that. You're off into that, and the notes are really getting more specific. Like how much more? Maybe 50% more than what you've already spent. Maybe 25% more. Maybe 15% more before you really start triggering consequences. And at some point in the future is also getting closer. And it's not just because a whole lot of time has passed since you started getting these notes from the executor. It's that the things they're talking about are happening sooner than they told you they would happen. It's like ice-free Arctic by 2100. Oh, well, maybe that's actually going to be 2030 ice-free in the summers. So as we're moving forward through time, the events that we're worried about are actually coming towards us to meet us. And the time is really getting quite short like that. And you start to realize that you could destabilize enough of the world's living systems to fundamentally endanger your civilization. And it occurs to you that that eccentric benefactor who left you all this stuff had a really warped sense of humor. It's an odd sort of inheritance. It makes you rich enough to destroy your home, but not nearly rich enough to build yourself a new one. Or maybe fossil fuels are like an enchanted chalice. When you drink from it, it makes you strong and powerful and beautiful. But it's a weird sort of chalice because your thirst is never slaked. It doesn't matter how much you drink. You drink more and you get stronger and more powerful, and that just makes you want to be stronger and more powerful. So you have to keep drinking from it. But you're starting to get the sense that you're a little bit big for your living room furniture. And you're starting to push up against the walls of your living room, and it occurs to you that if you keep drinking from this chalice, you're going to get so big that you're just going to burst your house asunder, and you will have nowhere to live. And there are people telling you, if you stop drinking from the chalice, you will die. But you're starting to realize that if you don't stop drinking from the chalice, you'll die. Leave that there. I get why people in our area would look longingly at the chalice and hope to drink more from it. If you walk down Main Street and look at all the empty storefronts, look at our population numbers, you can tell we're not thriving. 150 years ago, the nation was using coal to build and operate a transcontinental network of railroads. And this was the source of a flood of wealth. What it did was it made it simple to move things from where they're easy to grow and easy to produce to where the people were who wanted them. And that network needed a whole range of services to make it work. And for partially arbitrary reasons, Oneonta ended up being a place that provided some of those services with the rail yards and the roundhouse and the car barns. And because of that, a disproportionate share of that flood of wealth flowed into Oneonta, and it spilled over into the surrounding communities. But it wasn't just the railroad workers with their pay envelopes. The fact that the railroad was here was an advantage for small manufacturers because now you could easily get supplies in and you could ship your finished goods out. It was a boon for the farmers because they could easily get feed grain from the Midwest and they could bring it out and feed the cows on their fields that were far enough from New York City to be inexpensive, but close enough that the milk could get to the city fresh. And all of that meant that we were special. We played an outsized role in this network of transportation, helping to turn the nation's fossil fuel wealth into material things, and so we prospered. But the chalice giveth, and the chalice taketh away. And we shifted from railroads to trucks on highways, and the technology of railroads themselves changed, and we acquired the ability to move milk not just from upstate New York to New York City, but from herds in California with 10,000 head of cows. And so a place that can have herds of 100 and 200 cows doesn't have such an advantage anymore. As fossil fuels continued changing the way that wealth was created, our area no longer had anything particularly important to offer. So compared to the country as a whole, we stagnated and we looked around for solutions. When people talk about investment, they usually mean making money, buying stocks and bonds, real estate, something that you hope is going to pay a dividend or increase in price. You can sell it later and make money. For an economist, investment means spending money to build things. Infrastructure. Some of that is private, whether it's stores or factories or equipment in those factories. Some of it is public, like roads and schools. Some of it is energy related, and that's funded from a mix of private and public sources, from pipelines or oil wells or gas wells to photovoltaic arrays and transmission grids. Investment is building stuff that lasts. Investment is how we shape our future. The dominant fact about our future is climate change, human-driven climate change. And if we're not taking that fact into account when we make decisions about shaping our future, then we are not making those decisions intelligently. What the science is telling us about the future is that most of the fossil fuel inheritance that we haven't spent yet has to just stay in the ground. That doesn't mean that we're going to drop to zero carbon emissions in 5 years or in 10. Right? So we still have to maintain the fossil fuel infrastructure that we have. We're not going to stop driving gas cars tomorrow. But if we do what the science tells us is necessary, we do need to start now shifting to a path that allows us to decrease our emissions. If we stake our region's future on greater access to fossil fuels, there's only two ways that plays out. One is that our society gets serious about carbon emissions, and in some way or another, that means making fossil fuels more expensive and less attractive to use. When that happens, any new infrastructure that was based on expanded fossil fuel use becomes a stranded asset, infrastructure that can never pay for itself because we're not buying the product that it was built to provide us with. The other possible outcome is that the investment pays off. It's not stranded, but that can only happen if the broader society has decided to do nothing substantive about climate change. So we would then enjoy abundant energy in our little region while the world around us went to hell. If you build new fossil fuel infrastructure, you are placing a bet. You are betting that our country will continue to do nothing real about climate. You're not just placing a bet. You're making yourself an interested party. You are giving yourself an additional profit-based reason to keep our country on the sidelines of dealing with climate. You are aligning your interests with doing nothing. From a narrow economic perspective, easier access to fossil fuels is a no-brainer. We have plenty of things working against us economically in this area, and cheaper fossil fuels would be one less disadvantage. But there are lots of other places with cheap energy, so having that wouldn't make us stand out in any way. So what's the alternative? If you're not going to expand your fossil fuel use and eventually you're going to reduce it, you must be doing some combination of two things. You are using more renewables and you are increasing efficiency. We don't ultimately care about energy. We care about what we can do with energy. Keeping our houses warm, moving ourselves around, making stuff. If we can get those things done at a reasonable cost, then it doesn't matter whether we're burning lots of cheap fossil fuel or using smaller amounts of renewable energy. And people might say, but renewables aren't any good for manufacturing. Well, there's some truth to that, particularly in the short and medium term. But even there, efficiency and renewables can play an important role. If we insulate our homes, if we switch over to heat pumps, if we use pellet stoves, get some of our hot water from the sun, that frees up gas that we had been using for those things. And some of that can be used to support manufacturing things where there, for now, is no good alternative. This isn't a magic bullet. It's not a panacea. It's not going to give us back the special status we had when the railroad was king and we made it run. This is a different time. But it's putting us on the right side of the future. And what is it that we have to offer in that future? We have a reasonably well-educated population. We have a not too bad climate. We have plenty of fresh water. We have areas of good soil and plenty of cheap land at a reasonable distance from the country's largest and richest city. You know, all of that isn't nothing. Depending on how things play out with society's response to climate change and with climate change itself, our region may turn out to be blessed with some very valuable assets. I don't know what our future here looks like. But the baseline reality is that our society needs to be working on using less fossil fuel. We have to be planning to simply take the vast majority of our remaining inheritance and leave it in the ground. If we're planning intelligently for the future, we need to be figuring out how we're going to put the chalice down and not stick new straws in it instead. Thank you.